Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vanessa Grossel, Advancement Manager, and it is my pleasure to welcome you today as we continue to celebrate Innovation Month at the Council of State Governments. We hope you will find value in today's program and make plans to join us each Monday in May as we host these virtual innovation classrooms on a broad range of topics from healthcare to finance. Today's innovation classroom, Biosimilars, lowering drug costs, increasing access, and addressing health equity, is brought to you by Sandoz. And now a few reminders before we begin. This session is being recorded, and at the conclusion, it will be posted on the CSG website. We encourage audience members to type in any questions that arise at any point during the presentation into the Q&A portion next to the chat at the bottom of your screen. We will reserve time to address them following the presentations. And for now, why don't you go ahead and tell us in the chat which state you are tuning in from today. And now I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers. Juliana Reed, Executive Director, the Biosimilars Forum, and Dr. Sarah Yim, Director of the Office of Therapeutic Biologics and Biosimilars, the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research's Office of New Drugs at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Thank you for participating with us today, and I now turn this program over to you.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, CSG and Sandoz, for this great opportunity to tell you all about biosimilars, which myself and the members of the forum are always very excited to talk about, and they are clear innovations, especially for everyone in the states who has a patient or a family member or a stakeholder that is on a biologic drug. And today the innovation at the FDA has led us to having lower cost versions of those biologic drugs. So very exciting, and again, it's an honor to be here. I'm going to take a moment and share my screen so that we can, not going to share that part, we can get over to the presentation. And I always do a double check. Am I sharing? Okay, I'm going to take it that I am.
There you go.
Yeah, wonderful. So again, as I said, I'm the Executive Director of the Biosimilars Forum. And the Biosimilars Forum is the trade association for biosimilar manufacturers in the US. We are located in Washington, DC, but we also have a number of our members who are working, either employing and having factories and sites in your states, but also having discussions and representation in your states. We are, again, as I mentioned, we have 10 very strong companies that are devoted to biosimilars as well as other drug products that they make. Our members include Boehringer Ingelheim, Biogen, Coherus, Organon, which was a recent spin from Merck, Pfizer, Samsung Biopsis, Sandoz, Teva, Viatris, and Fresenius Kabi. What's so important about a biosimilar, and I know all of you are probably aware of what your state may be spending on biologic medicines for patients. Many of these patients have chronic diseases where biologic medicines have been life-altering and improving their life throughout by using these medicines. Chronic illnesses in the US are increasing and going to continue to increase to 2030 and beyond, where close to 50% of us will have a chronic condition. Many of us will require a biologic medicine to help treat that illness. Now, here's where biosimilars come in. First of all, and Dr. Yim will talk about the FDA's high standards for approval of a biosimilar. But what are biosimilars? One, I think it's very important to know there's no difference in safety or efficacy of a biosimilar than its branded version of that medicine. They're biologics, so they're created using living cells. They're typically administered via injection or infusion, so in many cases in the doctor's office or in the hospital outpatient infusion clinic in those type of situations. They became available back in 2006 in Europe, and then 4 years later, we were able to pass the Biosimilars Competition Act into law in the US in 2010. And our first biosimilar approved by the FDA was launched in 2015. As I mentioned, they treat many chronic conditions: cancer, arthritis, Crohn's disease, psoriasis, kidney conditions. And recently, we're able to tell you that the first ophthalmology biosimilar will be launched in June. One of the key things, so here's a list, and I know Dr. Yim will talk about this, but there's 34 biosimilars approved in the US, and 21 of them have launched since 2015. They're used in oncology and oncology support, autoimmune diseases like arthritis and Crohn's disease, and as I mentioned, the first ophthalmology biosimilar will be launched. Their names here are their drug names. So for instance, in 2023, the Humira or adalimumab biosimilar will be launching. Actually, 7 of those should be launching. So a very significant year for the biosimilars industry, but also for all of you if you are covering this drug. As I mentioned, our milestone over the last 12 years has been significant, with a lot of work by industry, but also in partnership with policymakers like all of you, as well as the FDA and those in Washington. And again, next year, 2023, is going to be very significant as the Humira biosimilars will be coming to the market. One of the key things about this, as I mentioned, was that right now, 40% of all prescription drug spend in this country is for biologic drugs, yet they only cover 2% of all the prescriptions. The biosimilar industry, which is, again, bringing forward an FDA-approved, lower-cost biosimilar that should create competition in the US and in the marketplace, and then drive down cost. One of the key things has been our experience that the market remains sluggish. As I mentioned, 34 biosimilars, 21 are on the market. Many are being held back because of patents. And Europe is ahead of us, not only by years, but they have more biosimilars approved. And one of the key things is the biosimilars are only available to 20% of the patients who need them, versus, as many of you know, generic, small molecule generic drugs are available to over 90%. So what our concern as an industry is that we're losing out on cost savings for consumers and patients. What's really key is we know from experience when a biosimilar does have access to the market, it creates competition, and the brand drug or brand biologics price can drop by 50% or more. Same experience as you see in small molecule generics. And we expect that the biosimilars industry, from economists who study this, can save the US healthcare system up to $133 billion by 2025. So that was in the next 5 years when this report was done in 2020. It's a significant amount of savings that is on the table for all of us. As I mentioned, they are launching usually around 30%. The first biosimilar that launches is launching around 30% below the cost of the reference. And then when more biosimilars are launched and competition and access improves, we're seeing prices drop 50% or below. And we continue, again, to have economists track this for the forum. And as you see from these slides, when Neulasta or Remicade had biosimilar competition, and as more competition comes up, comes to the market, the biosimilars cost goes down, as well as the brand biologic or the brand drug. This, we know the competition is working. The issue is the lost savings that are left on the table because there's not great access. So why is this important? First of all, lower cost medicines are always important for patients and their families and all of us. Especially important because many of these medicines are coming towards populations like women, seniors, and low-income individuals. They're the ones who are really expected to benefit the most from lower cost and increased access to biosimilars. 66% of patients being treated with biologics are women. 86% of the total patients are above the age of 40. And 42% are either poor or low income patients who may not have access to the brand drug at all. So I am going to turn this over to Dr. Yim. I want to thank everyone again for listening and being here. And Dr. Yim, I will try to drive your slides well, and I will turn it over to you, please.
Thanks, Juliana. That was a great introduction. Okay, so as Juliana mentioned, my name is Sarah Yim, and I'm the director of the Office of Therapeutic Biologics and Biosimilars at FDA. And I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of biosimilars, what they are from a scientific and a regulatory standpoint. Next slide, please. So first, some highlights to remember. Biosimilars go through a rigorous FDA approval process. They're highly similar to their reference products. And we don't use the word same because most biologics are mixes of molecular variants. So no dose of a biologic is exactly the same as the next dose, and that goes for the reference products. The Biologics Price Competition and Innovation Act, or BPCIA, was created to lower the cost of biologic medications through enabling competition. FDA maintains a database of approved biological products called the Purple Book, where you can look up a product and see if it has an approved biosimilar or interchangeable. And as Juliana mentioned, we approved another biosimilar a couple of weeks ago. So the count is now up to 35 biosimilars which have been approved. Of these, 21 have been launched in the US. So just to note that being approved by FDA is not the same thing as being available in the marketplace. But 21 products are out there we know of. So the BPCI Act was passed in 2009 and enacted in 2010. And that established this abbreviated licensure pathway for biological products. And the intent, as I mentioned, was to increase competition and potentially lower healthcare costs and increase access to these really important medications. Next slide, please. FDA applies the specific definitions set out in the BPCI Act. So when we approve a biosimilar, we must determine it meets the definition of being highly similar and having no clinically meaningful differences from its reference product. And when we approve an interchangeable, it's because, well, first, the company's applied for the designation, and second, it meets the criteria of being a biosimilar and additional criteria of being expected to produce the same clinical results as the reference product in any given patient. And information was provided to support the conclusion that switching between the proposed product and the reference product does not increase the risks of safety concerns or decrease effectiveness when compared to using the reference product without switching. And I'll talk a little bit more about interchangeables in a little bit. But first, I just want to step back and talk a little bit about why can't biological products be generics? And the way I like to think about it is you can think about a comparison of processes where you make a chemical drug using a formula of chemicals and steps of chemicals. And then the process is resulting in this very uniform product. When you use a living system for your production, for example, think about making wine or brewing beer, it creates a lot of complexity in the resulting product. You might expect every molecule of aspirin in your pill to be exactly the same, but you can tell there's something more complex going on in your beer. And that's what we're talking about with biological products, is the mix of things that's happening in the end result product. Next slide. That complexity is why we can't fit follow-on biologics into the generics category. Generics require the ability to determine sameness. And for biologics, the complexity they have means that sameness isn't even on the table. So instead, we determine that two products are highly similar and have no clinically meaningful differences. To determine they're highly similar, we use many different comparative tests looking at structure, function, potency, and purity of the product, among other things. And to determine no clinically meaningful differences, we may look at exposure and pharmacodynamic studies in humans, immunogenicity data, or additional clinical studies if needed. Next slide. So in summary, why use the term biosimilar instead of generic? It's because unlike chemical drugs, biologics cannot be copied exactly. And why can't they be copied exactly? It's because they are not made up of identical versions of the same molecule. They're a complex mix of versions in the product. Next slide. Thank you. So diving in just a little deeper, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we determine biosimilars to be acceptable for approval. Next slide, please. So all FDA-approved biologics undergo a rigorous evaluation so that healthcare providers and patients can be confident of the safety, effectiveness, and quality of these products. The approval process for both reference products and biosimilars requires manufacturers to have a demonstrated strategy to consistently control the pattern and degree of variation in their product between different batches so that safety and effectiveness don't change and they remain consistent and reliable over time. FDA evaluates each biosimilar on a case-by-case basis, and then we are able to advise manufacturers on the scope of additional testing that might be needed to show biosimilarity. Next slide, please. So if you think about the data needed for a new biologic, which is represented on the left, versus a biosimilar, which is represented on the right, the biosimilar is a streamlined set of data, but it's based on the foundation of the analytical comparison of the two products. The two products must be able to be determined to be highly similar in order to conclude that they'll work in the same way. The other studies in the pyramid are used to confirm that any small differences, which you'll see, you definitely will see that, but we use those other studies to help determine that those differences don't mean anything. Any clinical studies that are done are not intended to reprove safety or efficacy. There's just no need for that. This means the biosimilar developer does not need to repeat all the same clinical studies that the reference product conducted. The reference product had to do them because at that time, the molecule and the product is new and we don't know what the efficacy or even dosing is supposed to be like. On the other hand, biosimilars get to leverage that data by showing that they're highly similar. Next slide. So what is different for applications for interchangeable biosimilars? So if something's approved as an interchangeable, the BPCI Act states it may be substituted without the intervention of the healthcare provider who prescribed the reference product. In other words, essentially generic-like substitution. In order to support that kind of substitution at the pharmacy level, The BPCI Act requires that the product meet the standards for biosimilarity, but also two additional, what they call safety standards. The first being it's expected to produce the same clinical results in any given patient. And the second being switching between the proposed product and the reference product does not change the safety or decrease the effectiveness when you compare it to using the reference product without switching. So with respect to that first criteria of any given patient, it's not really clear how that differs from the biosimilar criteria of no clinically meaningful differences. But the second criteria kind of embeds a type of study design where two groups being compared, one group that uses the reference product without switching, and it's compared to a group where switching between products does occur. And we refer to that kind of a study as a switching study. And those may be used to help support this determination of interchangeability. But I also want to emphasize that interchangeables are not more similar and they're not higher quality than biosimilars. Interchangeables are biosimilars. So it really boils down to the question of automatic substitution and addressing the additional criteria that was set forth in the BPCI Act. Next slide, please. We're still at an early stage of the biosimilar approval pathway. So out of hundreds of approved biologics, we have 35 approved biosimilars to 11 different reference products. So if you want to figure out whether a certain biologic does have a biosimilar or interchangeable product approved for it, the simplest thing to do is to go to the Purple Book database and search for that biologic. If there's a biosimilar or interchangeable to that reference product, your search will pull up those products as well. Unfortunately, FDA does not officially track when a product is marketed, so that information is not available in the FDA databases at this time. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways, again, are the following. FDA's high standards for approval means healthcare professionals and patients can be confident in the safety and effectiveness of biosimilar and interchangeable products. I can tell you that these development programs are highly scrutinized and people are very conservative at FDA at making sure that when we approve something that it's going to have the safety and effectiveness that the reference product had. FDA's approval of an interchangeable biosimilar does not indicate a higher standard of biosimilarity, but rather that it underwent further evaluation to allow it to be substituted for the reference product without consulting the healthcare prescriber. So in other words, more generic-like substitution. Patients and healthcare providers do not need to wait for a biosimilar product to be approved as an interchangeable. Biosimilars are safe and effective, just like the reference product to which they were compared. And finally, biosimilar and interchangeable labeling is not required to be the same as the reference product, but FDA has taken the approach of utilizing the relevant data and information from the reference product labeling to be in the labeling of the biosimilar and interchangeable products. Therefore, you can expect the labeling to look similar. However, next slide, if you want to know the data that's specific to a biosimilar development program, you can still find it. It's publicly available. You can go to the third reference there, which is Drugs at FDA, which has information on all FDA approved drug products. And for the biosimilars includes the labeling and review information. These other references also have biosimilar information. You can go, there were several biosimilars that have gone through advisory committee and all those materials are public. And then also we have educational materials on our website as well. And I think hopefully these resources links will be available to you after the program. And I think that that concludes my presentation. I think we can take some questions if anybody has any.
Great. Well, thank you both for your thoughtful presentations. And at this time, I would like to encourage any audience members to type questions or comments into the Q&A for view only by the panelists and hosts, or into the chat for view by everyone. And feel free to include your name, state, and title if you'd like. We are joined for the Q&A portion of the program by Sarah Eikenberry, a Senior Communication Advisor for the Office of Therapeutic Biologics and Biosimilars in the Food and Drug Administration's Center for Evaluation and Research. Welcome, Sarah. And so we do have one question to lead off with in the chat. Representative Kathy Whitman of Montana asks, appearance-wise, do both products appear the same? If not, is there something specific that a patient can identify so they know if they are getting a biosimilar or a reference medication?
Juliana, do you want to take that, or do you want me to start?
Why don't you kick it off?
So in terms of appearance, if you just think about the medicine inside the container, that will probably look the same. What distinguishes all drugs is going to be the labeling and the packaging. And on the packaging, you'll see the biosimilar will have its trade name there. It'll have, a suffix right now, but reference products are also getting suffixes now, so that can't really distinguish it. But it'll have its own trade name. So you may wonder, is this the same product as my reference product? And the generic name or the non-proprietary name will include the medication. So for example, instead of Remicade, it'll say the trade name and infliximab. But infliximab is Remicade as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and just from a practical perspective, just to as Dr. Yim said, the packaging may be a different logo, maybe those little things about branding your drug. But I think what's really key is if the original drug, Dr. Yim, make sure I'm saying this the right way. If it's in a vial, it's still going to be in a vial. If perhaps it's a self-injectable drug, that biosimilar may come in a self-injectable as well. I think that's really key from the agency's perspective, down to patient safety. You should all be expecting not only is it safe, but also the patient and physician can safely use them. So not seeing differences in how it's administered and things.
That's right. They should be administered the same way. Presentations can get confusing because there are multiple different presentations available for the same drug. And so if your constituent receives something that looks so different that they don't know how to use it, then they should definitely raise that, right, with their pharmacist and their physician, because maybe there was somebody who got confused at what presentation they were supposed to be receiving.
All right, we have another question. What policy issues have you seen that pose barriers to the use of biosimilars in the States? And what is the issue with non-medical switching?
You want me to take that one, Dr.
Yeah,
Young?
why don't you start?
Okay. Thank you for that. And here's what we're, as I mentioned in my presentation, what we're seeing at the state level and what we're concerned about always is whether or not patients are having access to biosimilars. And it's really key, especially on the mid-year formulary changes. We're watching legislation that it may be limiting access to a biosimilar or an interchangeable biosimilar. I think it's important that the states are, looking. I'm sure everyone wants to see reduction in costs for medicines, especially for state populations where the state is funding both your employees and your retiree benefits and your Medicaid programs. And we are concerned when we see exclusion of biosimilars and excluding biosimilars from mid-year formulary changes. Now, or any formulary, or limiting anything to only an interchangeable biosimilar, which is not, not appropriate because, as we've said, only 2 biosimilars are interchangeable, and that has to do with pharmacy substitution, not physician administration. So it's real key to understand that patients need access to both and all. And also the greater competition you see with access of more than one biosimilar, you lead to your greatest cost savings because the pricing competition grows, as I mentioned earlier. So that's really important. And Vanessa, I'm glad you asked about non-medical switching. This is a confusing term for many patients and for providers, and really should not be used in context with biosimilars. So from a forum perspective, we believe non-medical switching is when a payer switches a patient to a new therapy. And as we mentioned, and Dr. Yim mentioned, having a patient transition or having a physician prescribe a biosimilar is not moving a patient to a whole new therapy or whole new medicine. It's similar to generic prescribing in that the biosimilar will have the same clinical effect as its brand drug. So you're not moving or you're not doing a non-medical switch with a biosimilar. And so I think that's really key, is to take biosimilars out of that conversation and understand that the patient is basically getting the same medicine that will have the same clinical effect that their higher cost brand drug does. So Dr. Yim, let me turn it over to you to correct me or to share your thoughts on anything you're seeing.
Yeah, no, I know there's a lot of folks who are concerned when they're being asked by their payer, for example, to change patients off of the reference product onto a biosimilar. And some folks call that non-medical switching. If we've approved a biosimilar, we've decided that there's really not a concern to that. That said, I fully acknowledge that concern exists, and it existed for generic products as well. And you know that those are exact copies. So it's certainly going to be something that we deal with from prescribers and patients. But we have a lot of educational materials addressing kind of what they can expect when they move from a reference product to a biosimilar.
All right, and Representative Pepper Ottoman of Wyoming wrote in with a comment and a question stating categories with approved and categories with launched were listed with examples on a slide. That was the comment. And then the question to Dr. Yim, what is your title again? And could you please explain molecular variants again? And thank you.
Yeah, everyone keeps having to pull me back when I start to explain molecular variants. So let me know if I'm going down a rabbit hole. But first, I'm the director of the Office of Therapeutic Biologics and Biosimilars at FDA. I'm an adult rheumatologist by training, so I'm a physician, and I spent over a decade doing new rheumatology drug development within FDA before I moved on to work for a couple years in generics, and then come over to help the biosimilar program. Molecular variants. So basically, the bottom line is that we're trying to create proteins mostly with these biologic products. And proteins are made from a genetic template, and that genetic template and that protein are exactly the same. But then when the cell's producing these proteins, afterwards, the cell will do little things to the protein to make them just a little bit different from, each molecule is slightly different from each other. Like they'll add a sugar on there. And for monoclonal antibodies, that sugar can sometimes impact the pharmacokinetics of the molecule, or it can impact the ability to do some of the mechanism of action. So that's what we look at. And the reference product also has a range, right, of these molecular variants. So when we're comparing the two products, we're looking to see if the range of all of the different important variants overlaps. Like they really should pretty much overlap the biosimilar versus the reference product. And this is all going on, of course, at a very microscopic level. You're not really going to see anything. Most of the biologics are given either by sub-Q injection or IV, and they'll look like clear liquids.
All right. Well, another.
The launched categories. Representative Ottman wants it. So the launched categories include most of the oncology products. So trastuzumab, that's Herceptin, Avastin biosimilars, Rituxan, so rituximab biosimilars, and then we have biosimilars to filgrastim, which is Epigen. Filgrastim is Neupogen. We also have a biosimilar to Epigen, which is a red cell growth factor. And then we have a biosimilar to pegfilgrastim, which is Neulasta. And then we recently had our first insulin glargine interchangeable approved, Semglee, and I believe Semglee is out on the market as well.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, a lot of the TNF inhibitors are not yet out on the market. So a lot of the arthritis and autoimmune related conditions, only infliximab or Remicade biosimilars are available. As Juliana mentioned, Humira biosimilars are not going to be coming onto the market until 2023.
And the ophthalmology biosimilar, right, Sarah, is approved?
Oh, yes. Yeah, there is one ophthalmology biosimilar, biosimilar to Lucentis, I believe. And that one should be coming on the market fairly soon based on what I've seen in the press.
Yep, next month. So that's very exciting. And Vanessa, we'll share the slides, right, with the recording so we can, and if anyone has any questions, the forum, and I'm sure Dr. Yim, we're happy to point you in the right direction if you need, and I think several of them are listed in the references you had in your slide as well, so.
All right, yes, and I will get that over to Representative Ottman, who missed the list of categories and wanted to know if you would relist the categories that had launched. So wonderful. Next question that has been typed in for us is, what are some innovative solutions that states can do to foster biosimilar adoption?
So I'll run with that. I think, first of all, just even considering biosimilars as innovation. Okay, so there is, biosimilars, as we've told you, lower cost than their brand biologic. So you increased, but I think one of the key things is looking not only at policies that may block the access, as we said, making sure your formulary change laws include all biosimilars as soon as they get on the market, and for both interchangeable and non-interchangeable. Combating misinformation. One of the key things, especially after hearing today, is, if you hear something that is contrary to what you're hearing today, because you're hearing from the head of the FDA here, Dr. Sarah Yim, So if you hear something that's contrary, reach out. We'll help. And the FDA and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, are active in making sure consumers and patients have accurate information. I think innovation-wise, and we see this with some of the largest employers in the country, and we can share with you, they're on our forum website, studies that the National Alliance for Healthcare Purchasers Coalition have done, and they represent employers like Ford Motor Company, General Motors, Disney, other places that have all proactively gone to their plans and to their PBM managers and say, look, we want the lower cost biosimilar on the formulary. We don't want the rebated brand or the high rebate. We want the competition. And so I think being innovative and driving access for your stakeholders is important, and making sure biosimilars are on your formularies and on your plans, and multiple are out there so that you're seeing the competition. I think that's a big one. So misinformation, access across the board, not just in your benefits for your stakeholders and constituents, but also in the policies and laws for your state's constituents. So thanks, Vanessa, for that question. Sarah, anything from your perspective?
Well, maybe Sarah wants to comment in a little bit more detail on all the educational resources that we have available for, the states to use, for prescribers to use, to help reassure people and give them more information on these products.
Yeah, thank you. We at FDA have developed a variety of materials for mainly healthcare professionals, although we do have some patient materials, and we will be having more later this year. But we have fact sheets, and newly released in December is a curriculum, which is really pretty broad, and it's a whole toolkit that you can find on our website, and it covers all sorts of the topics that that you were asking. I think Pepper was asking about the molecular variants. There's stuff on the variation. There's stuff on prescribing, like the regulatory review and approval, and just a general overview about biosimilars, the differences between biosimilars and interchangeables, et cetera. And it also is in 2 levels. So you can start with like the foundational, and then if you want more information, you can continue reading. And so that is helpful to educate, people are given a baseline understanding about biosimilars. And, there's some other additional information on our website as well. And one of the other things that we are, that we continually do is stakeholder outreach such as this, and collaborative efforts with people to help educate. And so we are always willing to educate or to work with states and other folks to figure out how we can help, like if you want to put an article in a newsletter, or other potential options are things that we can consider if that would be helpful as well.
Okay, great. And feel free to drop any links that you think would be useful from the FDA's website into the chat as well. Is there any research on what individual states could save with greater adoption of biosimilars?
Thanks, Vanessa. And yes, there is. And those are links I will share as well. But the Biosimilars Forum has been using an economist over the years from the Pacific Research Institute. His name is Wayne Weingarten. And what Wayne has looked at every quarter is the number of biosimilars that are approved and on the market, and at a state by state level, and we have these reports we can share with you, at a state by state level looking at claims, so the billing information for biosimilars and the reference biologic, and then also the Medicare average selling prices, how much biosimilars are being used versus the brand, and by what payer in the state. So for example, the state of California alone is losing out on at least $1 billion in state savings because there's very little use of a lower cost biosimilar. And we can give you that information for the various states over the quarters. But there are billions of dollars out there in savings for every state if that state increases your access and your use of a lower cost biosimilar. So I think, Vanessa, that's a really great question, and I'm glad to say we have that data for each state for you.
Okay, thank you. And then someone wrote in to say, I may have missed it in the presentation, but what products will soon face biosimilar competition?
Sure, absolutely. So I think, you know, as Sarah and I mentioned, you will see the first biosimilar for ophthalmology coming forward. So I think it treats macular degeneration, which is a very, you know, unfortunate disease and a very high cost therapy. So I believe that's a very important one for patients. And the significance next year of the Humira biosimilars launching is really important because that is, as I mentioned earlier, one of the highest cost prescription drugs in this country. And we know from our experience of launching, thank you, I will definitely get that, Kathy, for you on Montana. So thank you, we'll get those for you. I saw a chat pop up, so I had to reply. But the Humira ones, that's a very significant one launching, and I'm sure as everyone looks at their budgets, how much cost is going in there, and imagine the competition and how the cost will go down. We're seeing our companies look at their development pipelines for going out all the way to 2030. We'll see additional oncology products, ophthalmology products, inflammatory products come out. And I think that's the most of the cases, and I can get to you some additional information. And I think, Sarah, I don't know what you can share, but I think you've got some ideas. If I missed anything, let me know, please.
Yeah, unfortunately, we can't really get down to giving out information on what's in development. But if you think about any of the older biologics that you don't yet see competition for those in the form of biosimilars, probably there's some in development. The newest ones are often, you know, protected for a while longer, but certainly there's plenty of older biologics that have not yet received biosimilars being approved for them yet.
And I think the Center for Biosimilars has an article that's recent based on that Cardinal Health report that does outline some of the market, the future market for biosimilars and approved and product approvals that may be upcoming. So that's another source.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was just looking for it on my desk because I was reading it the other day, which is why I slowed down. But I'll get that over to your group, Vanessa, so you have it as well. So
okay, absolutely, thank you. Just time for one more question. And so, has switching from reference medicines to biosimilars been shown to be safe and effective in the real world setting?
So, you know, we do have a lot of experience with that particular scenario. I mean, Europe has been doing this biosimilar thing for quite a number of years before us. So maybe a decade even. So there's been a lot of that experience in Europe. Canada's gone through a couple of big switches. even organizations within the United States, such as Kaiser, have transitioned their certain reference products over to the biosimilar, and overwhelmingly, it's been smooth. So I think there are smoother ways to do it than others. Like I do think that there are some perception issues that need to be addressed up front, but scientifically, there's no concern to doing that. So it really is just more of a education and bringing folks along with the idea and helping to allay their concerns about it. But we have a lot of experience with it.
All right. Well, please join me in thanking the panelists, Juliana Reed of the Biosimilars Forum and Dr. Sarah Yim and Sarah Eikenberry of the FDA. In the coming days, this session recording will be posted on the Virtual Innovation Classroom registration page that you visited to sign up for this session. And to help you find it or to register for another upcoming Innovation Classroom session, please see the link that will appear in the chat. Each Monday in May, CSG will feature Virtual Innovation Classroom sessions. And up next on May 16th at 2 p.m. Eastern, we will be doing a session on innovations in diabetes management and prevention presented by the Diabetes Leadership Council. And also on May 16th at 4 p.m. Eastern, GlaxoSmithKline Consumer Healthcare will be presenting a session on multivitamins, how to leverage science and data to transform health and wellness. Thank you all for tuning in, and see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.